So I've been working on this theory here that maybe one of the main reasons why the Democrats really love the idea of gun control is because, well, they keep shooting themselves in the foot. And we've seen this during the Democratic primary where by now no Democrat has any chance against Trump. Even though we are down to Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden, it doesn't really matter because they have given him enough material during the primary season that he has all the attack ad materials that he could ever dream of wanting. And it's partially because the Democrats have been engaged in identity politics for so long in order to get past the part where they have no actual ideas or nothing to back up any of the ideas that they try to promote. But as we go through here, we realize that the Democrats are now using identity politics on themselves. And so all the attacks that will come out during the general election trying to claim that Trump is somehow a racist, sexist, or engaged in voter suppression, Trump will be able to point to the tweets from the Democrats or a video clip from the Democrats accusing each other of doing the same things, which then makes their attacks on Trump moot and pointless and exposed as a complete sham. You know, for instance, we got Bernie Sanders here. And in a tweet, he goes, while Republican leaders go on and on about voter fraud, what we really have is a crisis of voter suppression. Our administration will do everything possible to make it easier to vote. And he's doing this in response to a tweet about how the voter in Texas, Southern University, walked out of the voting booth. It took him nearly 7 hours to vote. Now, Bernie Sanders is wanting to go, long wait lines is about voter suppression. Of course, they've also come out during the season and said, well, because you didn't, support Cory Booker or Kamala Harris, it's because you're racist, or Juan Castro, it's because you're racist. And they've come out and said that you're sexist because you didn't support Kamala Harris or Elizabeth Warren. And they keep going through voter suppression and they go through with the sexist and racism charge. But there is one problem. These are the Democrat primaries. The Republicans play no part in it. It's the DNC and the state Democrats that organize, the primary election day activities for the Democrats. It's the Democrats that chose who they were voting for and ended up choosing right now, it just being down to Joe Biden and Senator Sanders. And so what's going on here is the Democrats are actually attacking their own base. When they come out and say that because it's now between Sanders and Biden, you're racist, you're sexist, when it comes to the long wait lines in the Democrat primaries, it's voter suppression. Well, it's the Democrats doing that. The Republicans have no part in the Democrat primaries. The Republicans are not the ones going out and choosing who the candidate for the Democrats is going to be. The Republicans play no part in how the Democrats run their voting during the primaries or how many voting locations they have and where they're set up. It's all run by the Democrats. So it's interesting to see that the Democrats are attacking their own base as sexist, bigoted homophobes and accusing their own party of voter suppression. And Trump is going to be able to go through and, create ad after ad after ad, highlighting just how bad the Democrats are. Or at least take out any weaponization of identity politics against Trump by pointing out, well, they called you guys, the regular American people, the Democrat voters, they called you all these things. Are you really all these things? And so they keep shooting themselves in the foot and showing just how much they despise the Democrat process. How much democratic process, I should say, and how much they despise the idea that they got to compete for your vote. Now, identity politics is a complete garbage way to go about selecting voters or not selecting voters, but selecting candidates. You should vote for me because I'm a woman. Yeah, but are your policies any good? Well, that doesn't matter. I'm a woman. You should vote for me so I can be the first. Or vote for me because I'm a minority. Well, are your policies any good? Well, that doesn't matter. I'm a minority. I should just automatically get the vote. See, they can't compete on ideas, which is why they went to identity politics to begin with. And now that they are, competing against each other, they can't help it. Identity politics is their only go-to when things do not go their way. Now, some on the left are realizing, wait a minute, we're not supposed to be attacking each other with these charges. And so when Elizabeth Warren or Kamala Harris came out and talked about maybe sexism as the reason why Elizabeth Warren's candidacy failed, those in the media, started coming out and going, no, that's not right. It's not because of sexism, because we don't want to accuse our own supporters of sexism, because if we go out and accuse our own base of sexism and they come out and go, wait a minute, I'm not a sexist. I've been supporting all these, feminist causes. Well, if you're calling me a sexist, then maybe all those charges of sexism and all that about the Republicans, maybe that's wrong. Maybe I should give the Republicans an honest look over. And so they might lose some of their base. And the media is starting to realize this. So now they're trying to go out and cover up, the charges of racism and sexism against their own party base and trying to say, hey guys, maybe cut it out. But on the other hand, maybe some of the things that the Democrats are hoping on is the fact that their base is too flippin' stupid to realize that their base, that the party leaders is calling their base all these horrible things. I mean, it's interesting, because when Sanders throws out this tweet, about, voter suppression because of long lines in the Democrat primaries, his supporters are going out there thinking that, yes, this is, a situation of the GOP suppressing votes. Oh, it's the GOP's, and their base does not realize that we're talking about the Democrat primaries. Their base does not realize that, hey, the GOP is not involved in any of these events that you are accusing to be the result of racism, sexism, homophobia, and voter suppression. But yet their base actually thinks this is an attack on the GOP. Now, that's not surprising because they can't do math, and I'm going to come out, a little bit later and try to explain, the rise of socialism in a different video and how that rise of socialism in part is due to the left's inability to do math. I mean, we've all seen that MSNBC video where they claim that $500 million spent on a campaign could have given every American $1 million. And so we'll go through, the whole rise of socialism and the math and the left's inability to do math, and along with some other factors. But in this particular case, now that we understand how poor they are at math, we can understand why they are too stupid to realize that the Democrat leadership is actually insulting them, while they, being insulted, believe it's an attack on the GOP. It is really quite an amazing situation, the complete lack of comprehension over this entire event. Now, there are some other things that are going on as far as the Democrat primary. Now, as far as the outcome of the primaries, what I would like to see. While a lot of people are going off saying they hope to see Bernie Sanders get the nomination because Trump is going to crush Sanders, because Sanders is a socialist, communist nutbag who's going through and talking about things that don't even exist as examples to support his policies. For instance, as you see Bernie Sanders constantly coming out and talking about socialism like Denmark style, like they have in Denmark or like they have in Scandinavian countries. Now, those Scandinavian countries have come out and condemned Bernie Sanders and asked Sanders to stop slandering their countries as socialists, because when you go through and you take a look at Sanders and what he's claiming, he wants a Denmark that doesn't even exist as an example. Now, Denmark itself as a country exists, But Bernie Sanders' version of Denmark doesn't exist. Denmark abandoned socialism, because it was crushing their economy, killing their economy. It was leading to high poverty and lots of starvation. So they abandoned socialism in order to go to capitalism, and things picked up. So Bernie Sanders, when he's talking about Denmark, he wants you to go for the 1970s socialist Denmark, but he wants the 2020 capitalist Denmark results. And he's trying to claim, that they're one and the same somehow. So he's talking about, in a delusional form, something that doesn't exist. A socialist, a prosperous socialist Denmark. They had to abandon socialism to become, prosperous. But in any event, what I would like to see is Trump versus Biden. Now, while Trump will easily defeat, Sanders or Biden, if the reason why I picked Biden is not because he's just an easier person to defeat. I'm just wanting to pick Biden because, well, the entertainment value. I mean, can you imagine on the debate stage, Trump versus Biden, the ultimate gaffe machine versus the ultimate troll? And how Biden, is going to go out there and stumble over his words. And just like Trump did with media personalities, interrupting, come on, you can spit it out. Come on, get to it. And how Biden is become mostly incoherent. Plus, Biden has already given Trump everything he could need for a campaign ad to completely crush Joe Biden. For instance, let's take a few things that Trump could use in a campaign ad in the general election against Joe Biden.
Once again, fight for the proposition that we hold these truths to be self-evident. Sounds corny. Not a joke. Think about it. We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men and women created by you know the thing. You don't get far unless you ask. My name's Joe Biden. I'm a Democratic candidate for the United States Senate. Glad to see you're doing well already. And I'm good. But guess what? If you elect me, I'm not going to have your taxes are going to be raised, not cut. I'm going to guarantee you this is not last year's scene of this guy. You're going to take care of the gun problem with me. You're going to be the one that leads this effort.
Okay, so think about how that will play in a general election situation. Biden talking about how he's going to raise your taxes and how it's kind of sad that you're prospering under the Trump tax cuts. How he can't even, quote the Declaration of Independence. Well, you know the thing. And then him going out there talking about how he's going to strip away all your guns, your Second Amendment rights, and all of that. Now think about how that's going to play in the general election. Now think about Joe Biden, as you've seen, as incoherent as he is, how, there does seem to be, a serious case here of mental and cognitive decline with Joe Biden, how that's going to go out on the debate stage in the presidential debates. I mean, from an entertainment perspective, what will be the funniest thing to see? It would be Trump versus Joe Biden. Now, my dad brought this up, and I hadn't thought about this before, but the worst possible outcome, for the election, well, I guess maybe not the worst possible outcome, but one of an interesting outcome for the election would be Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi, a ticket for president and vice president. And my dad brought this up because it would be like, well, how would the media cover them? You can't understand anything either one of them say. They're both incoherent, mumbling and, unable to, really focus. I mean, it would be very hard for the media to cover them because no one would be able to understand them and what they're saying. So, I mean, that would be one way to avoid criticism. No one can ever understand anything you say. But imagine how that would lead to a lot of miscommunications in the government and some of the things that they would end up, stating for policies, and then everyone throughout the communication chain would be like, huh? What? I don't necessarily understand. What is it? Can you clarify what you're asking for? Yeah. Hey, Miss Pelosi, could you clarify that for me? Yeah. So imagine that as a particular outcome, for, the election. Now, in the general election running up to that, can you imagine the hilarity of the memes and all that going through with videos of Pelosi and videos of Biden and their incoherent ramblings? Now, as far as it goes, that's not to say that Trump versus Bernie Sanders wouldn't be entertaining as well. Now here you got two high energy people, but Sanders, is kind of a delusional person in his own right. He lives in a fictional world that doesn't exist. We already explained the issue with Denmark and how he's going off and trying to claim about a Denmark that doesn't exist, where he wants to implement Denmark's 1970s socialist model, but wants the result of Denmark's 2020 capitalist model. And so he wants the socialism with the benefits of a capitalism economy. You kind of have to pick and choose, because there's nowhere in the world where socialism has actually worked. I mean, it has a 100% failure rate. That should tell you something. In fact, you can go back to socialism all the way to Exodus in the Bible, and you can figure out that not even God could get socialism to work. That's just how bad socialism is. Now, in going through and getting out there, Biden is still lying about particular events, but of course that's normal for a Democrat. Lying about their history, lying about their past experiences, lying about even their family tree. Biden has been lying, for decades, just like Elizabeth Warren lied, and just like Bernie Sanders lies about everything. And one of the things that they keep going back to, which is another lie that the Democrats have come up with that have been debunked in every way, shape, or form. And that's when Biden came out and he wanted to talk about Trump's reaction or, interviews and press conferences regarding Charlottesville. So let's take a look at what Joe Biden said, because, when you go through and put out such demonstrably provable lies, it's easy to debunk. So let's take a look at Biden's lies.
But I was wrong. What happened was, in 2017 in Charlottesville, close your eyes and picture those folks coming out of the field with their veins bulging, carrying torches, carrying Nazi banners. David Duke saying, "This is why we elected him," accompanied by white supremacists. And the young woman was killed. And the president was asked to comment. He said something no American president has ever said. He said, quote, "There were very fine people on both sides." By the way, it's more than a boo, it's a reality. No president has said that.
You're right. No president has said that, and your mischaracterization, is so false that it continues to be that no president said that. Now, when we take a look at Charlottesville, there was actually 4 groups there, right? 2 local groups on opposite sides of the issues regarding the statues, and then Antifa and, the white supremacists, not neo-Nazis and all that came in, to add, to the fire, add gasoline to the fire. That was there. Now, the local groups, they did not, intermingle or mesh with the Antifa and the white supremacists. They just, kept away from them while they continued, going through their demonstration and protest and all that. But the media wants you to believe that there was only, the neo-Nazis and then, these counter protesters, that they want to classify Antifa as. Now, Trump in saying there was very fine people on both sides, I guess, they're kind of upset that Trump would say that there's actually fine people in the left wing as well. I mean, it's kind of interesting how, Antifa, a violent, terrorist left-wing group, and then the white supremacists mix up and get into a big battle. And they're upset that Trump would actually recognize that there's blame on both sides, from with the white supremacists and the, terrorist Antifa. and that there were fine people on both sides of the issue that were not part of those other two groups, of Antifa and white supremacists. And so they keep going through, and how they've been able to push, this idea that Trump was giving support to, white supremacists and all that, while the left was trying to ignore the terrorist organization of Antifa being there, is they had to edit out or avoid showing you certain clips of the public statements that he gave during that time. So let's take a look at the first thing that Trump said in his very first, a press conference or public statements regarding Charlottesville.
The terrible events unfolding in Charlottesville, Virginia. We condemn in the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence on many sides. On many sides.
So Trump was absolutely right in that statement, that there was hatred, bigotry, and violence on both sides of the white supremacists and Antifa. And he condemned the hatred, bigotry, and violence. Well, Trump had given subsequent press conferences and interviews in which he had discussed Charlottesville. And while the media wants to go off and play, only, a snippet of, of that in order to push a narrative, because remember, while the media is telling you a story, they're not actually telling you the story, right? Because they're trying to develop a narrative. They don't care whether or not that narrative is true or completely bogus. So let's go off and take a look at another clip here that shows what Trump had said in subsequent interviews and statements. And notice the one part where the media consistently leaves off.
And you had people, and I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis and the white nationalists, because they should be condemned totally. But you had many people in that group other than neo-Nazis and white nationalists, okay? And the press has treated them absolutely unfairly.
Oh, excuse me,
They didn't put themselves down as you, and you had some very bad people in that group. But you also had people that were very fine people on both sides.
Okay, so the part that the media always leaves out is the part where Trump is saying, and I'm not talking about neo-Nazis and white supremacists because they should be condemned totally, completely. So it's obvious when he was talking about fine people on both sides that that did not include any of the neo-Nazis or white supremacists. But they keep pushing the whole idea that he was calling neo-Nazis and white supremacists as fine people or included in that fine people, because they're constantly leaving out the part where he says, I'm not talking about those guys because they should be condemned totally. And how do you get this idea that, Trump saying they should be condemned totally, completely, and all of that as being support for them? It's very much a cognitive dissonance, but considering how easy it is to debunk the left's attempt at creating a narrative, a fictional story, it makes it harder for them to actually get elected, because in the day of, social media, the media, the traditional media, is unable to, keep these fictional stories going, and the truth keeps on getting out there, which is why the media is always going through and trying to put pressure on social media companies to censor conservatives, to censor the, truth, to censor facts, because they want to get to a complete censorship so that they can get back to the days where they are able to completely, promote a fictional narrative and get you to believe it because you have no access to the truth. But so far, we're able to still access the truth, and, whether it's shows like this or other shows that are much bigger, and we're able to see, what's really going on. Now, the left and their base are going to continue to, want to live in a fictional world with no relation to reality, because it's easier to try and blame other people for the results of the decisions you made in your life, rather than actually take responsibility for those decisions, because as long as it's everyone else's fault, you're a saint. You've done nothing wrong. And so they're going to continue to live in this fictional world where they, create fictional narratives, they lie, they do all of that because it's all designed to help them avoid taking personal responsibility for any of the decisions that they have made. Now, as far as it goes, outside of the Democrats' primary, we got other issues that are going on that will have an impact on the election. For instance, coming from CNN Politics, there's a case before the Supreme Court, in which they're asking to let faithless electors vote their own way. Now, if you're not familiar with how the Electoral College works, what goes on with it is the state, generally has the population vote. And then the electors who are, appointed to the Electoral College representing that state are to go through and take a look at, this is how the people in my state voted. Therefore, I must respect their wishes and, cast the electoral vote, for my state based on how my state voted. But the Democrats are going off and they're trying to undermine democracy and undermine the Electoral College. And so they've been starting to go off and saying, hey, we don't care how the people in our state voted. We're going to cast our electoral votes, our state's electoral votes, for the winner of the national popular vote, which is a complete and total disenfranchisement of the voters in that complete state, because they're voting one way, and the electors who were appointed to the Electoral College to represent that state are going, yeah, but I don't like who you voted for, but I like who won the national popular vote, which is never how the elections are decided. And so I'm going to cast my vote a different way. Well, now, what a faithless elector is someone who's part of the Electoral College who, isn't pledged to a particular candidate. A pledged elector is usually going, hey, you pledge to cast your electoral vote for the person who won the majority vote from our state, right? But now they're wanting to get rid of that altogether and say, hey, I don't care how my state voted. I'm just going to cast the electoral vote for whoever I want. And so what they go through here in this, as they go through this article, is basically saying that, yes, election day, people go to the booths, and let's say, in Iowa, for example, 60-70% of the population votes for Trump. And the electors that cast the electoral votes for the state go, yeah, well, I don't like Trump. So even though, he got 70% of the votes in my state, I'm going to cast my electoral vote for the Democrat nominee, for the other person. Which then you get to the question of, then what's the point of voting, right? If it doesn't matter how you vote, that the people in the Electoral College can just cast their vote however they want, cast the electoral votes however they want, then then it doesn't matter, how we vote in a particular state. And it's a complete and total disenfranchisement of the voters and the election of the president, because we can consistently, go through, and if the faithless electors, get their way, in the Supreme Court, then it doesn't even matter who wins the national popular vote. You could have 70% of the country vote to reelect Trump, and the faithless electors, will go off and go, yeah, but I'm still going to cast the electoral votes for Bernie Sanders. And that's what they are arguing before the Supreme Court for the ability to do. They're just arguing to be able to say, we're going to ignore the vote of the people, and the electors are just going to independently decide for themselves who they want to cast the electoral votes for. Where currently the members of the Electoral College who cast the electoral votes have to pledge, promise, and be bound to the terms that they must cast the electoral votes for the candidate that won their state. But the Democrats, they don't care. They're trying everything that they can possible in order to try and undermine democracy, undermine the will of the people, and cut us out of the election process. It's really quite amazing. And yet they're the ones out there trying to claim that it's Trump that's undermining democracy and attacking our freedoms. Okay, so there's just a few more things that I want to get to today. Another thing going from the Supreme Court, again from CNN Politics, Supreme Court rules against an undocumented immigrant fighting state prosecution. And so it goes on to say the Supreme Court ruled Tuesday against an unauthorized immigrant in Kansas. Unauthorized, which is, euphemism for illegal immigrant, someone in the country illegally who is committing crimes by being here. But in any event, holding that a state could convict him of identity theft without interfering with federal immigration laws. And so what's interesting about this case is, an illegal immigrant is trying to argue that they are immune to prosecution for any state crimes and any other federal crimes for that matter, because investigating or prosecuting him for state and federal crimes will interfere with the immigration case. Because, if, we're only going to deport illegal immigrants that committed crimes, then convicting them of a crime interferes with his, case to try and stay here in an immigration lawsuit, or, could lead to his deportation, and therefore, the state prosecution of him committing a crime, will trigger deportation, and therefore it's interfering with immigration. So somehow he's trying to say that by being here in the country illegally, he's immune to all other crimes, or being prosecuted for any other crime. This was a ridiculous argument, and yet it made it all the way to the Supreme Court. And it's interesting. Now, he was being prosecuted for identity theft. And here's what the left doesn't want you to know about illegal immigration. Being in the country illegally is not the only crime they're committing. They have to commit a whole host of crimes in order to survive in the country illegally. They engage in identity theft. They engage in perjury. They engage in forging documents. Because they need to do so in order to be able to survive in the United States and open up banking accounts, get a place to live, credit cards, mortgages, and all of that. It all, involves in forgery and identity theft in order to do so. But they're trying to go off now and claim that by being in the country illegally, they're immune to all other, prosecutions for all other crimes, because that will interfere in the federal immigration case, and federal cases take precedent over state, crimes. Therefore, they can't be prosecuted for anything. It's amazing the lengths that they will go to in order to try and avoid, being held accountable for their crimes. But it's just like any other leftist. You can't be held accountable for anything because everything is someone else's fault. Now, some other interesting stories, this one coming from the Dan Bongino Show website. Covington Catholic students to sue 5 more media outlets after CNN settlement. Now this is a very interesting in the fact that I want to say, yeah, go get them. Because if you remember what happened with the Covington kids, they were on a school trip, minding their own business, but they were wearing MAGA hats. And so a bunch of leftists started harassing these kids. These Covington students started harassing them, calling them names, getting up in their faces. And the media vilified the students who were the targets, who were the victims in this particular case, because they just stood there smiling, not saying anything, not doing anything, just, smiling and letting the other people, letting all the, leftists, harass them as they were waiting for their bus. And so it's because they didn't tuck tail and run, for a safe space that the media went off to vilify them. And they started putting up, little snippets of video that completely mischaracterize, the entire situation. And so the students, in this particular case, decided to sue the media for defamation. Or maybe it's libel. I forget, which one's print and which one's video. They probably sued them for both, given the written articles and the video coverage. And so the Covington kids won the lawsuit against CNN for their horrible coverage of the events and trying to vilify the Covington students who did nothing wrong. And by the way, the media tried to defend, well, these kids were, public, in the public spotlight. These kids, were, became personalities. But the thing was, they weren't. The media is the one that, through pushing their false story narrative, pushed these students into the media spotlight. So the media had tried to say, well, because we pushed them into the public spotlight, they're now public figures, which means they are now open to criticism. And the students are like, we didn't ask or seek out the public spotlight. We were just standing there waiting for the bus. We didn't respond. We didn't, react. We just stood there and waited for the bus. And they were vilified. So now that they won the case against, CNN, they are now going after all the other media outlets that propagated this fictional narrative against them and slandered them. All right. And I hope they win. Okay. So now there's another interesting article that had come out, and I'm constantly sweeping through websites looking for what is the best things to talk about for this particular show. And one thing came out when it came with, sorry about that. Don't know what happened there. But when it came to Vice, and Vice News had come out, Vice's website, man fined for engineering without a license was right all along. And what goes off and makes this story very interesting is the particular fact that, the left, they're a bunch of snobs. They believe that you have to have, a certain level of official college education to be an expert, or you have to have certain licenses to be an expert and certain credentials. And that if you don't have those credentials, you don't know what you're talking about. If you don't have certain awards, you're not reputable and you're not authoritative, and therefore there's no reason whatsoever to listen to you. And so now they're going off and saying, well, if you give input or advice, you can now be fined. And so when they go off and they talk about how he was fined for engineering without a license, it's not that he was actually going out and, doing it as, his career, or actually engaged in a business or a company as an engineer. No, what had happened was he noticed that there was an issue with his wife and her commute to work. He studied the issue, and he wrote up a proposal. He wrote up an opinion on how to improve it. So he was just giving feedback and opinion about, based off of his research, here's what we can do to improve the traffic light situation and increase efficiency. Giving, your opinion or expressing an opinion should not constitute, engineering without a license. And so he was fined for it. But, a group decided, of actual engineers, decided or was commissioned to actually study his opinion, and proposal that he written up with all the facts and, data that he had provided, that he had gathered when writing this. And it turned out he was right. He was smarter than all the experts. And, he was able to determine that, hey, we have a problem here. Therefore, I'm going to research the solution. Oh, hey, look, I think I found a better way. Here, let me submit this as just a proposal, feedback, whatever. And instead, as providing feedback and opinion based off of research, they fined him and claimed that just providing a suggestion for how to improve the traffic in the area was considered engineering without a license. And they fined him. And then in the end, it turned out that he was right, and all the credentialed experts were wrong in how to best and most efficiently plan the traffic in the area. And so this is the snobbery of the left, wanting to go off and say you have to have certain, documents and credentials and all that in order to, be allowed to have an opinion on anything, when in reality, everybody has the ability to learn, research, and go off and, find solutions. But the left, they believe in that snobbery. They are elitists. And of course, who hands out all of these credentials? Left-wing institutions. And so, therefore, only left-wingers get the awards and get the credentials and all that. And those who are conservatives, well, they're denied all of that, even though the conservatives, 9 out of 10 times, is going to be right, and the liberals are going to be wrong. But they will have to create this elitist system in order to feed their own massive ego about they're the ones who are important. They're the ones who are the smart, and everybody else is just an idiot with an uneducated opinion. Okay, one last article here that I want to point out here, and it's coming from the Daily Wire. And it points out that the Senate panel prepares to issue first subpoenas in Burisma Hunter Biden investigation. Now, it's about time that the left actually gets, investigated for their criminal and illegal behaviors and actions. And so the defense that the left is trying to come up with on this is, oh, see, this is election interference. And they even got that idiot Mitt Romney to come out and attack the GOP. I mean, I hate rhinos, people who are, actually liberal Democrats, who go off and pretend to be Republicans in order to get elected in a red state or a red district, and then spend all their time attacking other Republicans in order to get favorable media coverage. But Mitt Romney, he is a complete idiot. He couldn't even defeat Obama. And that should have been an easy layup of a win. But in any event, the Democrats are coming up with this problem that because they went through and, tried to do impeachment based off of the Ukrainian phone call in which Trump, in passing, in the general discussion about corruption brought up, Burisma and Biden and the video of Biden. And so they went into, the impeachment. Well, because they went into the impeachment, everybody was playing, hundreds of, and even thousands of plays of Joe Biden, bragging about how he got the prosecutor, looking into Burisma, a company his son sat on the board of, fired and leveraged taxpayer funds in order to do so. Well, now that impeachment is over and going, hey, actually, Trump is able to investigate corruption, and, you Democrats, you've gone out there and you've admitted no one's above the law, and now you're trying to say you're above the law? That doesn't make sense. And so now there's all these investigations coming down on, Burisma and the Bidens because of all of them, exposure of what Biden bragged about having done. And so, the Democrats are now trying to go, well, see, the Ukrainians are now opening up an investigation into this. See, there's the quo, there's the quid pro quo. It didn't happen right away, but now it's happening. See, we were right all along. Or, hey, now Trump is trying to use, government, and the Republicans are trying to use government in order to target political opponents. Now, of course, that's what the Democrats do, abuse government to target political opponents, but they're trying to ignore the fact that their own impeachment attempt put a huge spotlight on criminal behavior, on illegal activities, or at least, things that appear to be illegal and criminal, and that their own impeachment attempt is what has now opened up investigations into the criminal and illegal activities of the Democrats. Whereby, if they just didn't say anything and they didn't try and do anything, no one would have really noticed or paid attention, and we would have moved along. You could have slipped it under the rug or, been able to hide it. But they're now trying to say that, the exposure to their activities, that was the result of their attempts to impeach, now justifies their intentions to impeach, because now The action, I mean, it's basically, the chicken and the egg argument. And they're trying to muddy that up. They're trying to say, well, here's our impeachment failed. Oh, now here's the investigations. Therefore, we were right in our impeachment charges, where instead it went, they tried to impeach. We, uncovered a video, a confession of a criminal act, and now we're investigating that because we now became aware of it. So in any event, the Democrats are having a huge problem in the Democrat primaries, whether it's attacking their own base or having exposed their own past illegal and immoral activities and behavior. And their elitism and their attacks on democracy and attempts to, disenfranchise voters from the actual process of selecting the president, all of this is getting highlighted. And all of this, being captured, documented, and recorded is going to be used in attack ads during the general election. And the Democrats, well, they're pretty much screwed when it's all said and done. Okay, so right now I just wanted to thank you for taking the time to watch this video on YouTube or listening to the audio version of this show, whether that be in Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or anywhere else you get your podcast. But if you're watching this on YouTube, please check out the videos playing off to the side to watch more content, and don't forget to hit subscribe. Thank you, and I will be back again soon.